Welcome to the second season of the Modern Man podcast. I am Dr. Robert Frankel, board-certified anti-aging, regenerative medicine, and emergency medicine physician with a keen focus on male aesthetics. With my co-host Zoe Gullickson, we look at the cutting-edge and exciting trends in aesthetic medicine. We answer the questions that you probably have that you always wanted to ask before you walked into a med spa. And we look at the cultural issues and things that we see that you probably always wondered about. So I hope you enjoy this season of the Modern Mind podcast. It's going to be lots of fun for us. I hope it's lots of fun for you. And enjoy the ride.
So welcome everybody to today's podcast. And we have a pretty exciting topic that we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be talking about something called exosomes. And for a lot of people, they've heard the term. They don't know whether this is a something from the future, something that an extraterrestrial has brought down, or it's something that I need to know about. I'm going to tell you today it's something that you should know about. Some of the technology is early on, and a lot of the research is very early on. And we're going to just discuss what is the science behind exosomes and what is the benefit. What would be the benefit to you for getting exosomes treatments? And we're going to just go through it. And so let's go in it. So welcome again to the Modern Man podcast, and I appreciate you coming in today. So we're going to go and we're going to try to kind of break this down as simple as possible. We're not going to go through cellular biology. I'm going to give you the best explanation that I can, so that way you can kind of understand it and get a good realm of it. I mean, if you are a cellular biologist, then feel free to go into the deeper research. Please message me and we'll talk about it. I just love to talk about these topics. So exosomes are nanoparticles from cells. Now, cells, of course, are the basis of life. Everything that we have starts from these cells, and inside the cells we have different things called organelles. Organelles are kind of mini organs of the cells. So just as we have stomach, intestines, liver, kidney, the cell itself is made up of small little particles that actually help to function each individual cell. So even though the cells are microscopic, they each have a mechanism of function and mechanism of action. So exosomes are truly nanoparticles, basically things that you'd never be able to see on, with your naked eye, but obviously with microscope, an electron microscope, to be perfectly clear, you'd be able to kind of see it. But what is in the exosomes is really the important thing, and that's what we're going to go through, and that's how we're going to look at it. So the exosomes basically are these small little, what we call, I would say little kind of packages, and they have a lipid bilayer. And what that means is that it's the fat layer of protection, which is really important. The reason why that's important is because of the fact that the exosomes protect what's inside, and so you're able to actually transport whatever is in these exosomes, safely, and you don't, get the breakdown of the loss, with the exosomes. So that's the first part. So the exosomes actually have a lipid particle. Now, when they first discovered these exosomes, they thought that these were just like waste particles, because what exosomes, if you want to be technical, were essentially causing or producing something called endocytosis, And endocytosis is basically getting rid of waste of the cell. And so that's what it does. It's the way the cell poops. And but the thing about it is that when these exosomes leave the cell, they actually go on their own, and they often pick up materials that have valuable material. So originally they thought that, oh, these exosomes that are sitting out there are just, filled with waste. There's no use to them. But then when they look deeper into it, they realize that there are actually things like certain very valuable proteins, stem cells, which we're going to talk a lot about, even some microRNA, messenger RNA, even some DNA particles. So there's actually genetic material that are within these exosomes. And so that in itself is very valuable, because these particles can help to regenerate. So exosomes, for our purposes, we're going to only discuss aesthetics. Now there's all different fields that are going into exosomes, including cancer research. I mean, it's a very powerful kind of technology that has emerged, and there's a lot of different disciplines that are looking at it and thinking that they have something that's very valuable. So it's exciting. But for aesthetics itself, it does have a very valuable course, and I'm going to talk to you about what is the reason why the exosomes are valuable to it. So the first thing that I'd like to kind of go through is, often everybody talks about stem cells. It's one of these buzzwords that has been out there for years, probably, for 40 years. Everybody says you got to get your stem cells, and it's always been one of these things where, stem cells are, looked at, positively and negatively because of certain, political kind of connotations. But realistically, the stem cells are just cells. They don't have any politics to them. They are simple cells, and they exist in all of us at many different parts of our life. But especially when we're younger and developing, of course, this is where we have the most percentage of stem cells comparably to any other time of development. And what stem cells are cells that are what's called undifferentiated cells. So what that means is that the cell itself has not changed into something definitive. So what, again, giving you a little bit better explanation, what a stem cell is basically doing is you're looking at the cell, and you're kind of making sure that the cell eventually is going to become somebody. It's going to become a policeman. It's going to become a fireman. It's going to become a doctor, lawyer, an Amazon worker, whatever it might be. It's going to become. But the reality is that in the body, the cells are excited to become specialized. The cells originally are undifferentiated, and they eventually can become muscle cells. They can become liver cells. They can become specialized for the bladder. They could become for the cells for the nerves. So they become differentiated into a specific type of cell. But originally, beforehand, they're completely kind of blank. They're a blank slate, and they can become anything. And why is that valuable? Because the reason why that's valuable when it comes to healing and any type of kind of nanomedicine, essentially, is because of the fact that, if you have things that need to be repaired, like collagen, elastin, things that were within the skin, for instance, these stem cells can step in and actually either become those cells, and they can become new cells, or these cells can help to repair the cells that are already there that were damaged in the first place. that's a very valuable, a very, very valuable tool because of the fact that, these stem cells can really, be productive in that it really is going to assist the body in helping the, the damaged or unrepaired cells. So this is the reason why stem cells are such a big topic in all types of medicine, not only aesthetic medicine, but again, you're going into diabetes, cancer research, and of course, because of certain political issues, in the United States, they haven't really been able to advance to a certain degree. However, there are cells that are okay, and exosomes, are FDA approved for, you know, for limited use in certain cases, and so they are present, and we're able to extract them and use them. And of course, you can do things that are not FDA approved but off label. Um, and so that's the way that we're able to kind of take the exosomes and kind of use them, to really see like what is the benefit for this. So that's basically what we're going to look at, and that's the way that I best kind of look at where the exosomes come from. Exosomes are present in almost every cell, but the cells that we're going to focus on are the cells that are going to be most valuable because of the fact of their either properties, their healing properties, their high turnover properties, or there's something specific about those cells that really those exosomes, what's in those exosomes, is very valuable. So you can extract exosomes from bone marrow. You could extract cells from platelets, and you could extract exosomes from placenta. And why is this valuable? I mean, because of the fact that where do you get the highest degree of stem cells? It's going to be from the placenta, where the developing fetus is growing and where development is most valuable. So cells that are within the placenta themselves, those cells are going to have a high degree of valuable exosomes because of the fact that you have cells that are going to, have a lot of stem cells. So when those exosomes are present in the placenta, many of those cells are going to carry stem cells. And the reason why I discuss that is because of the fact that, in our aesthetic medicine, this is going to be the most valuable part of it. The best way to describe exosomes is that it is the ultimate messenger boy of the body, meaning that, the exosomes can actually leave the cell and kind of move from one cell to another. And it's just, it's the ultimate like Amazon delivery of nanoparticles. It could take really valuable things and move it from one cell to another. And this is being used in some really valuable data, including cancer research currently, because of the fact that they realize that if you're able to kind of help, one cell, be valuable to another, this is really helpful to the cells itself, and it's really pretty exciting stuff. But I mean, specifically, clinically for us, when we're looking at aesthetics, if you're adding exosomes, for skin and hair, this is really kind of the major benefits that we're seeing for aesthetic purposes when it comes to exosomes. And so we're going to go into these valuable tools. We're going to look into the research. Now, much of the research that has been done, there's animal research, and this is part of the issue why you haven't heard a lot about it. It hasn't been, it hasn't had big breakthroughs yet, But the clinical data, the clinical manifestations of what we're seeing with the results, often are much, much quicker than a lot of times that you'll see the actual research data takes time, to get the, the studies and everything that are present. The exosomes that you get are also important. Like, where are you getting them from, the purity, and it's important that you talk to your practitioner if you're doing any type of exosome treatment. Where did you get the what company did you use to get the extraction of the exosomes? Do they have data that shows the safety of the exosomes? Because these are obviously cells, so you want to make sure that the cells are definitely going to be safe and going to be pure, and there's going to be nothing else dangerous that you're adding into your body. And if you find the right companies, those companies all will send not only where the exosomes are extracted from, but also they're going to send you data on the safety of the exosomes, making sure that they've tested for all types of different infectious diseases and the purity of it. And so this is vitally important that you think about this, because of course the most important thing is that you want to get the benefit, but you want to do it safely. And so this is also really super important. And so we're going to talk about like how the exosomes for the skin is going to improve the fine lines, the wrinkles, the sagginess. All these things that are present are going to be greatly valued. So we're going to go through some of the research. And like I said, most of the research that we're going to talk about are going to be animal studies. And I'm going to go through it. We're going to sit and kind of like, weed through what the research says. Does the research seem valid? And then we're going to kind of talk about the clinical data and what is the benefit, if any, for you. So we're going to take a break here. Definitely start, like looking up the information about exosomes. But we're going to take a break, and then the next segment, we're going to, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research of exosomes. Okay, so back, I'm going to talk about the studies that they found on were pretty interesting about the exosomes and how they really are different than some of the other products that are kind of claiming about stem cells. PRP is one that will kind of take the differences between and kind of take a look and see. So in 2019, there was a study that looked at exosomes, and they found that in certain exosomes, specifically placenta exosomes, there was something called microRNA present in these exosomes. And the microRNA actually, what it did was it helped produce NAD. And not to get into the weeds, but what it really did is it helps. Now, when NAD has to do with like your cellular metabolism, cell aging, and as NAD starts to dissipate in your cells start to diminish and decrease. And so when you start to have low NAD, then cells start to die. So this was kind of the opposite. And so what ended up happening is they found that patients who had low NAD, they had more cell loss, and this is very close, a close approximation to aging. There's a clear relationship to the lower NAD, the increase in aging. What they found is that with the exosomes, the cellular metabolism increased the number of NAD products, in other cells, and thus it decreased the aging of the cells. And some of the cells that were that were programmed to die because of the low NAD did not. And so this has a much different kind of path than just kind of stem cells, because of the fact that you're looking at how exosomes actually reverse aging on a cellular level, not only to the point that it's repairing certain cells, but also it actually is at a cellular level reversing the aging of the cells by helping the metabolites of the cells, reproduce. So that was an incredible, change, when you compare that to PRP, which, PRP, has a lot of great positive effects and that we've talked about before. But PRP, for the most part, has growth factor stem cells, but there's not a cellular mechanism that helps to kind of reverse the aging of the cells, which the exosomes clearly have. In 2021, there was another study that was done that talked about photoaging. And photoaging basically is, as the cells age, they're going to increase the number of melanin, production. And so when that happens, you start seeing hyperpigmentation. What that means is that when you see, just a little bit more pigment in the skin, this is going to brown spots, red spots. That would be a perfect kind of example of what you would mean by hyperpigmentation. This is caused by an excess production of melanin. And so what they found is that, they had cells that were exposed to UV light in rodents, and they added the exosomes. And what they found is a couple of things. Those cells that were exposed to UV light were not retaining the same amount of melanin as the cells that were not added with the exosome. So first and foremost, they were protected. So there was a protective ability of the exosomes, in that they helped the cells not carry as much melanin, which is really, an important thing. The second part is that, the excess melanin that was present already in certain cells has been found to be dispersed. And the dispersal of these cells, is something that, is absolutely, a game changer, because of the fact that hyperpigmentation is a very difficult thing to treat, and because of you adding the exosomes, clearing those melanin cells really does help to clear, those cells, the skin. It makes a more clear appearance. Inflammation in itself is improved by exosomes. We find this in clinical practice because of the fact that, when we use exosomes, often it has to do with, patients who receive treatments such as a laser, a like RF microneedling, any type of, like ablative type of treatments, and we give them the exosomes post-care, and we find that, the reversal of the, the redness or the inflammation is incredible, and so we have found incredible results with exosomes just from the inflammation part itself, that's the reason why it does such incredible work with scarring, with any type of lines, wrinkles, because of the fact that it's getting down to that cellular level where it's affecting those those cells. So that's the pretty incredible part of this story, that it's positively affecting the melanin by preventing the excess production of it, also dispersing the excess melanin that's already present in the cells, and decreasing inflammation at the core. And so these studies were all proved this in the studies that we did. Now the hair story is a whole different situation, which I think is really important because people are very interested in this topic, and there has been multiple studies that have shown that exosomes have improved people who have had hair loss, and the hair restoration portion of the story really is pretty incredible. And how does it work? I mean, so what they found is that in 2018 there was a study that was done, and this was again an animal study, and I believe that this was done on mouse mouse cells. They found that the proliferation of the hair follicle, the hair follicles themselves, greatly improved with the exosomes being added into the follicle itself. And there was also a clear distinction in the cells going in from the dormant phase to the growth phase. And so there was the addition of the exosomes, the cells increased by almost 50% that were in the dormant phase, going directly into the growth phase. So these studies were pretty impressive. Again, all these were animal studies, usually overseas, not many American studies, but they were they were present. So a lot of the stuff that we're going by are these animal studies, but also by clinical data. In 2022, there was a study that that showed that there was also a positive change in the dermal papillae of the hair follicle. This is kind of the nerve center of the hair follicle. This is where the hair follicle is nourished. This is where the hair follicle usually is either going to have its growth or it's going to have its change. And this is a big change in that the fact that there's very few things that we found that really kind of increase the production and the growth of these this part of the hair follicle. So in 2020 there was these animal studies that were done, and I believe this was in Sweden, that showed that there was an extensively increase in growth of the dermal papillae of the hair follicle, which was significant because of the fact that it did help the production of hair. And this is going to give you that incredible growth. So this is where we are. This is where we are at right now with exosomes, as far as the clinical data, as far as the research goes. There are 3 studies that are human studies that are presently going on right now that are not complete, but the idea of exosomes in the aesthetic world are promising, and outside of the aesthetic world there are significant advances, because of the fact that there is a way in which we're able to allow this to reach the cells in a totally different manner, and it's been incredible. So in my practice, what we've seen is, like I said, we've been using this for inflammation, post-care, just incredible wound healing, incredible results. I mean, it's dramatic when you have somebody who has had some type of procedure where they have very kind of red erythematous areas that are usually going to stay that way for 3 days to a week, and it gets better in less than 24 hours. I mean, that's a significant change. So the texture tones, fine lines that are present, we've seen great results because of the fact that you're adding stem cells. The cellular metabolism of the cells are greatly improved, so you're turning back the clock on these cells, which is something different than any other technology. And so besides for the fact that you're improving the collagen and the elastin, you're actually helping the cells that are kind of aging and improving their Latin life. With hair, this has been also kind of a game changer. Stem cells, it has always been kind of the holy grail, but PRP we've had great success with, but with exosomes added to the scenario, it has been truly remarkable, the results that we're seeing, because of the fact that we are now adding something that's focusing and working not only on decreasing the inflammation, and the growth factors, which PRP does, but it actually is growing the dermal papillae, which is kind of the nerve center of the follicles. And there's strong evidence that the growth of the hair follicles are getting improved, and they're getting an increased number of these follicles that are moving from the dormant phase into the growth phase with the exosomes. Again, this is all clinical data. This is, the research is still out there. It's not, it's not proven. So you have to, you can take this for what it's worth. But for the most part, we've seen really positive results. The community that has worked with exosomes, has very positive things to say, and we've seen a lot of positive results in our practice. So the science makes sense. The results are very encouraging, and that's is really kind of like the beginning of any type of important kind of research that we kind of look at. So there is no guarantees, because of the fact that this research has to be done, this research has to be focused on, and I think that it will be done. I think that we're getting to the point that exosomes are something that is going to be more broadly looked at, more broadly accepted. You're starting to hear it more in the mainstream because of the fact that there is a real kind of desire for the cells to, the body to get to the point where you're achieving, much better results. And I think that with the exosomes, we have that opportunity. So I hope this answered some questions. This, again, like I said, exosomes are, the purity. I think the important bullet points that you have to understand is that, this data and the data, the research is very early on. The purity of the supply is very important to how the performance is going to be. And you have to, be able to understand and have patience with how this is going to, best benefit. I feel that, there is a lot of really positive possibilities with exosomes. We have seen a lot in our clinic, and we're going to continue to monitor, practice, and give you the best possible answers at the Modern Man Podcast and Simply Aesthetics. So we appreciate your listenership. We appreciate you coming to us. If you enjoy this content, please like and share and comment below. It means a lot to us. And we will see you next week on the Modern Man Podcast. I don't know what that